I'm writing this to share a peculiar encounter I had while on a retreat in Sedona, Arizona. It happened in late October. I've always been curious about Sedona's spiritual reputation. Curiosity about the metaphysical and a desire for self-discovery drove me to book this trip. My days in the retreat were filled with various activities like guided yoga, chakra balancers, healing stone sessions, and intensive meditation. We were encouraged to connect deeply with the earth. Despite all of us being strangers, there was a strong sense of unity among the attendees, as we were all seeking something profound. During one of our late-night meditations, things took a strange turn. As we gathered outside, the stillness of the desert caught all of us as having a strangeness to it. Meditation began with our guide invoking the spirits of the four cardinal directions. We sat with our eyes closed, focusing on our breath and inviting the energies of the universe to align with ours. It was then that I first felt it, a slight disturbance in the harmony that we were all trying to create, an energy that was off kilter, so to speak. Opening my eyes, I immediately noticed a pair of yellow eyes glowing from the edge of the darkness beyond our fire circle. At first, I thought it might be some local fauna, a coyote or a wild dog maybe. But as the meditation carried on, so did my feeling that we might be in danger. The eyes would disappear and reappear at different spots, as if the creature was pacing the periphery of our gathering, watching us closely. Flashes of something tall and agile moving quickly suggested a form significantly larger than your regular desert wildlife. I noticed a few others cast quick glances towards the darkness, their meditation broken just like mine, faces mirroring my confusion. Next, there was an unsettling sound that we all heard, almost like a whisper, but also sounding like actual words. At the time, I had no idea that this was just the beginning, and the real encounter was still to come. And little did we know that our beliefs were about to be tested. I then noticed a strange phenomenon, an alluring light glowing amidst the darkness of the desert, different than the eyes that I had previously seen. It wasn't part of our retreat. I just knew it for a fact. It felt different, even ominous. But for some reason, I felt compelled to follow it into the desert. So I broke away from the others and started to wander off. This actually didn't alert anyone, because we had been instructed earlier to follow whatever path our minds and bodies felt we should follow. As the light drew me farther away from the retreat, I felt cold, and the whispers became clearer. I tried to blame the desert for my strange feelings, but deep down, an inexplicable dread was rising. I ended up near a towering cactus that looked eerie under the moonlight. That's when I saw a vague silhouette shifting in size, altering in shape. It was an unsteady, blurry image that I had to squint to even see. As I watched, it changed from a coyote to a crow, then an owl, and finally, a human form about 6 feet tall. Against my better judgment, I stood my ground and made eye contact. This thing's eyes glowed a yellow shade and seemed almost hypnotic. The same eyes from earlier. The air around me now felt thick with a musky, earthy scent. Its laughter, it was so human yet laced with a monstrous tone. Taking a step back, I noticed the figure move with an unexpected speed towards me. Panic surged through me, and all the warnings of desert horrors from locals echoed through my mind. I fumbled backward as a realization hit me. Was I face to face with a skinwalker? Banging into the rock formations behind me, I lost my footing and tumbled, letting out a cry that seemed to startle the creature. I scrambled back on my feet and, without taking another look, dashed back towards the retreat, knowing in my gut that I just encountered an entity that the natural realm couldn't fathom. I rushed back to the circle, heart pounding and shaking uncontrollably, but I didn't utter a word about what had just happened. I just explained my shaking by saying I had finally let go of a personal burden I had been carrying around for too long. Truth is, I had actually now added a burden to my life with the knowledge of what I had just seen. When the retreat wrapped up, I left Sedona, having experienced a spiritual awakening of a kind that was completely unexpected. Undeniably, though, this encounter scared me to my core. It also filled me with an odd sense of respect and recognition. for these ancient legends many dismiss as mere campfire stories. It showed me how limited our understanding is compared to the vast mysteries around us. I share this profound encounter with you as a reminder to myself and others to keep seeking truths beyond the obvious. A few years back, I took a solo road trip through Arizona during a full moon. I had always wanted to drive across America, just me and my car on the open roads, and the timing of it with the full moon had been purposeful. Part of my trip included traveling through the Coconino National Forest. Now, if you've never heard of it before, it's this immense wilderness in Arizona, known for towering ponderosa pines and sweeping red rock formations that look as though they were carved by ancient forces. The GPS showed a narrow lane diverging from the main road and cutting directly through the forest. Drive on a smooth highway or swerve through a barely visible dirt path in dense woods in the middle of the night. It wasn't even a competition. Driving through the forest, under the full moon's glow, filtering through pine needles, was mesmerizing. But it was also silent. No crickets, no rustle of the wind. Even my old Chevy seemed to hold its breath. This silence felt different, and my unease quickly grew into dread. And there was this strange smell, a scent I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual mix of pine or spruce, or the fresh mountain smell you might experience in the wilderness. It was more acrid, more pungent, like sulfur. I drove a few extra miles, windows rolled down, listening to Bob Seger play on the radio, trying to ignore the weird feeling creeping up my spine. I was there for the thrill, so I tried to brush it off as the natural unease of being isolated. But then I heard it. The silence was broken by this low growl that seemed to come from everywhere all at once. The growl morphed into a howl that echoed through the silent forest. Before I could make sense of the sound or the situation, there was a sudden heat increase. It felt like I was getting closer to an open bonfire, but that was impossible. There was nothing, absolutely nothing that could cause a fire. Yet the further I drove down the path, the hotter it became. Whatever was going on, I knew then that there was more to that night than I could have ever expected. I wasn't just lost in the woods. It felt like I was losing myself. The bright moon now cast strange shadows that mixed with my car's headlights. Just as the heat was becoming unbearable, so much so that the steering wheel felt scalding to touch, I saw a fiery glow up ahead. It was then that I saw the thing. Crossing my path a few hundred yards ahead, silhouetted by the moonlight, was a beast from a horror film. This wasn't some cinematic illusion. It was real. It was the size of a small horse, but structured like a dog, lean and muscular, with a skeletal form seemingly responsible for those chilling shadows around me. Its hide seemed to fluctuate between matted, dark red fur and patches of what looked like decaying flesh. It was grotesque, and the very sight of it was nauseating. And those eyes, its fiery red eyes seemed to burn intensely. It howled again, and its howl echoed eerily through the forest. The once peaceful night had taken a terrifying turn, and I, of all people, happened to be there to witness it. Then came the chase. The beast howled and two more joined it, appearing from the shadows. In front of me now was a trio of hellhounds, and unfortunately, I seemed to be the prey. Starting my Chevy felt like a gamble, especially with those creatures so close by. They were incredibly fast and kept pace with my car. The searing heat increased with each passing moment. The smell of burning flesh thick in the air. Desperate, with my pedal to the metal, I barreled down that dirt path, hoping the metal of my car would keep them out. Eventually, after what felt like an agonizing eternity, I broke through the edge of the forest, entering an open clearing. The temperature immediately dropped, and the unbearable stench faded. Looking in my rearview mirror, the fiery eyes of the hellhounds receded back into the darkness of the forest. Overwhelmed, I pulled over to catch my breath, my hands trembling on the wheel. The night grew silent again, but a comforting warmth washed over me. It was relief, true relief, that I had escaped what could have been my doom. Looking back, all alone under that big, bright moon, was I truly lost in that forest? Or did I stumble upon something beyond understanding? Either way, I think I'll stick to the highways in my future trips. After all, I know my story sounds unreal, and I might have doubted someone else's story like this. But those fiery eyes in the darkness of the woods, and that chilling howl, they were real it gets. Every road trip I take now, every detour I see brings me back to this. And there you have it, the mystery I encountered in the quiet woods of the Coconino National Forest. Savannah has always fascinated me. It's one of the oldest cities in Georgia. The place is steeped in history, and history always comes with its own stories, which I love. That's why I was there one weekend back in 2019, visiting a buddy of mine. His name's Marty. We got to talking about these haunted tales people like to tell. Stories of local hauntings have always been prevalent here. I was skeptical at first, but thought it could be a fun way to spend a Saturday night. So there we were, signed up for a ghost tour that covered a good bit of the historic district. Those old colonial houses and grand squares are a sight to see, even if you don't believe in ghosts. But at nighttime, with just the lampposts and the tour guide's flashlight for illumination, it's an entirely different ballgame. The soft street lamp glow gave the city an eerie feel, with shadows seeming to lurk around every corner. Our guide was a big, burly guy with the deepest voice I ever heard. He was incredibly knowledgeable, and his way of storytelling was genuinely spine-chilling. We started off around Monterey Square, the famous Mercer House looming ahead. The guide took us down shady lanes, narrating heartbreaking tales of lost loves, vengeful spirits, and mysterious disappearances. Each house we passed was seemingly more haunted than the last. Despite my skepticism, I was deeply engrossed in the stories, each one evoking a mix of melancholy and intrigue. Marty was cracking jokes for the first half, but I could see him growing quieter as the tour went on. I suppose the tales can affect even the most skeptical among us. We visited a couple of places on the list: the Colonial Cemetery, the Sorrelweed House, the eerie Hanging Square, each with a tale more chilling than the last. By then, even I felt uneasy, attributing it to the power of suggestion and our surroundings. About an hour and a half into the tour, we entered Calhoun Square. Now, Calhoun is known as Savannah's most haunted square. There's an anonymous burial ground at its center, and it's surrounded by some of the city's most notorious haunted houses. Our guide shared that people often report feeling cold spots, see strange lights, and hear whispers in and around the square after dark. We moved on, and I couldn't help but notice a peculiar chill in the air that hadn't been there before. It was undeniably eerie. We then stood before a particularly dilapidated house. As the guide started on his next narrative, I felt a tug at my jacket sleeve. Figuring it was Marty, I turned around to tell him to quit it, but he was on my other side, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. Blinking back confusion, I glanced down and saw the dull glint of an antique-looking locket at my feet. As I bent down to pick it up, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I instantly knew it wasn't Marty or anyone else from our group. The touch was too cold, almost unnaturally so, and it made me shiver and gasp. Everybody turned their gaze towards me, including Marty and the guide. Their eyes locked onto something behind me. I turned around and came face to face with a woman, or rather, the figure of one. It was a translucent figure with a kind of otherworldly glow about her, looking profoundly sad. I heard whispers all around me, and panic started to set in with the group. Shockingly, there were chains wrapped around her wrist, with matted black hair reaching up to her shoulders. The whispering around me grew more insistent, and among the murmurs, I caught a name: Amelia. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled back. The figure just stared at me for a moment longer, before disappearing into the night air. The hand on my shoulder disappeared with it. With a dry mouth, I forced myself to swallow and looked up at our tour guide. His face was a shade paler than before, and his eyes wide. A prickling sensation swept over me in the chilly air, a response I couldn't control. After a few gulps of cold Savannah air, I found my composure and held the locket up to the guide's lantern. Inside was a faded sketch of a young woman. Underneath the face was a single word, barely visible but still legible. Amelia. The rest of the tour passed quickly, everything blurring together as I could barely concentrate. And I think the guide just wanted to distract us. Marty, pale and quiet, tried to lighten the atmosphere with a few forced jokes, but even he felt the shift in our surroundings. The rest of the night passed with an unspoken agreement to not discuss the earlier events. I spent that night researching Amelia, and what I found was incredibly unsettling. A young woman named Amelia, reported missing in 1886, was one of Savannah's most haunting stories. Her disappearance had remained a mystery, and some believe that she still roams the city. Holding the locket now, it was becoming less a mystery for me and more of a first-hand encounter. Savannah, it turned out, still carried its past around in more ways than meets the eye. I questioned my own skeptic notions, questioned what I knew, or rather what I didn't know. In my hand was a piece of Savannah's eerie history, a direct link to stories between this world and whatever might lie beyond. It happened a few summers ago, and I believe it was in late July. My buddies and I were music junkies, and we had our sights set on this offbeat festival right in the heart of Joshua Tree National Park, California. Joshua Tree National Park is known for its rugged desert landscape and distinctive trees, an odd place to hold a music festival, but it gave it that unique touch. The atmosphere was isolated, really out there, unlike our lives back home. It attracted music enthusiasts, artists, and adventurers like us, looking for something different. Our group was buzzing with excitement before setting off. It was our first ever desert trip, and the idea of a music festival under the sky sounded awesome. Our expectations were more than met. The music, the people, the place. It all fell into this perfect blend of celebration and escape. When we arrived, the festival was in full swing, with the vibrant beat of music from various stages filling the air. Musicians from all over filled the space. Between performances, we explored. Craggy rock formations stood alongside the iconic Joshua trees against the vast desert backdrop. During the day, the place baked under the sun, but when the evening came, it cooled down and you could just sit and gaze at the sky filled with countless stars. It felt like a different world. After an amazing performance by a band that had split up 2 years ago, but reunited just for this, we lay on our backs watching the stars. The crowd was beginning to disperse, but all we did was lay there, admiring the crystal clear sky and bright constellations. A gentle breeze stirred the desert sand and rustled through the sparse desert plants. And closing my eyes, I soaked in the calmness, thinking, this is it. And then the tranquility was interrupted. At first, it was nothing but a sensation, an inexplicable shiver of excitement, that prickling sensation running through our skin. We looked at each other, silence hanging. Each of us waited for someone to break the uneasy spell and mention what we were all feeling. But before any of us could say a thing, something in the night sky caught our attention. Just as we were sharing glances, an odd light show began to play in the sky above the festival grounds. At first, I thought the festival organizers were putting on a drone display, or maybe a satellite was passing by. But these lights were moving in a way that had me second-guessing. Above us, several lights in an arched line stood out with their silver glow against the dark sky. They pulsated softly, casting an odd, almost metallic sheen. They weren't big, probably the size of a car or a small truck, but their sheer presence was undeniably overwhelming. And they moved, not erratically, but gracefully. Swooping across the sky, they floated and bobbed where an aircraft wouldn't, falling and rising gently, as if teasing the laws of physics. We were stunned into silence, yet we couldn't look away. The sight of those UFOs, their surreal glow, their dance against the backdrop of the moonlit night was mesmerizing. The festival grounds went quiet. everyone's attention captured by the bizarre scene above us. For a few moments, it felt as if time had stopped. The music, the laughter, the clattering of beer cans all blended into a distant hum, almost drowned out by the hum, a mechanical, almost ethereal sound coming from the lights in the sky. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the show in the sky ended. One by one, the lights dimmed and then winked out. But unlike stars, these lights didn't blaze out. They faded gently, leaving us to wonder what had just happened. In the days to follow, we pored over what we saw countless times amongst ourselves and with others who had shared the spectacle. Some dismissed us as just drunk revelers, but we were sober enough to know what we saw. It was real, and it was out there. That night left us each with a sense of profound fascination and a touch of fear, to be honest. It sparked 1,000 questions in our minds. Are we alone in this universe? If not, who are our celestial neighbors? Ultimately, that experience overshadowed everything else, becoming the unforgettable highlight of our summer. Now, when we talk about that night, it's not with fear, but with a sense of wonder and perhaps a bit of hope. That night's encounter with the unknown left a mark on us. I believe we're all quietly hoping to see those lights again, to experience that mix of awe and curiosity. Who knows? Perhaps one day, those same lights will return, and when they do, we'll be ready. I've always explored nature on my own, so when I packed up my SUV and headed out in the middle of July to unearth the secrets of the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado, it was nothing unusual for me. It was a sunny day with blue skies, and the sunlight made the sand glisten. With every step, warm sand enveloped my shoes, and the vast dunes seemed endless, reminiscent of a golden sea. I've always been drawn to wild places, and the towering sand dunes held a certain mystery for me. Although I was well acquainted with nature, I was unfamiliar with anything supernatural. After walking for several miles, I stopped at a moderate slope to take in the awe-inspiring views. A smattering of yucca plants peeked out of the dunes further away, and the sight of them amidst the vast sands was humbling. The rest of the world seemed distant, drowned out by incessant gusts of wind carrying tiny specks of sand. I was captivated by the solitude of the place. Minutes turned into hours, and soon the blazing sun started to set. I sat down watching it set. Just as I was doing so, a sudden uneasiness crept into me, breaking my reverie. Realizing how deserted the venturing site was, I suddenly felt uneasy. It was then my eyes caught something unusual. Far beyond a distant dune, I noticed a rapid movement skirting the ridges of the sand dunes. It was too far to discern, but for a fleeting second I imagined I saw a form, a silhouette both familiar and foreign at the same time. It had a human-like stature, but moved with an agility that was far from usual. It vanished before I could take a better look, leaving behind an unsettling feeling. The once calming winds now felt ominous, and the sand beneath my feet seemed uneasy. As darkness gradually crept in, casting long and weird shadows across the dunes, my anxiety heightened. I shook my head, dismissing the eerie feeling, and decided to call it a day. The day had turned to a tense evening, and I realized it was getting late. Little did I know, the real encounter was yet to come. As I headed back to my SUV, parked a couple of miles away, I started hearing sounds that I couldn't quite place. It began with a soft rustling, then came a low, eerie whisper that seemed to carry through the wind directly towards me. It was more troubling because, somehow, the whispers began to sound familiar, almost like they were repeating my own voice. Just a few hours earlier, I was talking to myself, excited about the exploration. Now, those whispers seemed to repeat what I said earlier, like a delayed echo. Growing increasingly worried, my pace quickened. The whispers grew louder, less indistinct now. Adventurous streak, untouched treasures, beautiful sand dunes. My own words played back to me in an uncanny echo. The voice sounded human, but the following laughter didn't. It was chilling and inhuman. Suddenly, a shape appeared on a dune next to me, almost hidden in the dark. The figure had an unnatural quality to it, appearing human-like one moment, only to shift into a monstrous animal-like shape in the blink of an eye. I squinted, trying to see its details, but its form was too inconsistent and scary. Exploring, I heard again, clear as day, my own voice. The unseen voice's laughter pierced the stillness again, sending a chill running down my spine. I tried to think logically. Maybe the wind was causing the echoes, but it felt like a nightmare come to life. Its size, the way it moved, and how it transformed ignited a deep fear in me. An indescribable dread overwhelmed me, and I knew I couldn't stick around to sate my curiosity about its true form. I couldn't understand what I had seen. It was beyond anything I knew. With my heart racing, I ran back to my SUV. Once in the safety of my SUV, I struggled to process the night's events. Over the following days, the fear turned into an obsessive need for answers. I found myself talking to locals, sharing snippets of my experience, and asking them about any legends or rumors they knew about. An elderly local told me about skinwalkers, beings from local lore said to mimic voices. It explained the eerie occurrences at the dunes. Though I found some peace in the explanation, no amount of intellectual understanding could drown the recurring nightmares, or the chill I would feel every time I remembered those echoed whispers. My memory of the great sand dunes changed. Its beauty was now overshadowed by that eerie experience. The dunes were no longer about adventure for me. They reminded me of that disturbing, unexplained encounter.